All righty. Hello, everybody. How are you all doing today? You can either chat with me by microphone if that's enabled, or you can chat in the chat box. Just let me know you can hear me. All righty. So tell me a little bit about the situation most of you guys are in. Are you applying soon to vet school? Are you like a first year, second year? Like where are you guys at in this whole process? So we got anything from looks like first years to people that are applying. So some of you have probably already taken the GRE, but it sounds like most of you are getting ready to take the GRE sometime in the future. For even those of you that are first years, one of the things I'll just start and preface this whole thing with is this is not irrelevant information. In fact, you could potentially take the GRE sooner than later as long as you don't take it too far in advance of your application. So the test is not super content dense, as we'll find out. So honestly, sometimes if you can take it a little bit earlier than just before you apply, that might make it a little bit easier on yourself because the content is so much more straightforward than you might imagine for like an MCAT or something like that. So my name is Doug McLemore. I'm a staff advisor for the HPA. I'm also the test prep specialist, and I've probably run into some of you guys at some point doing something, but here we go. First off, what is the GRE? It's this thing called the Graduate Record Exam. It's been around for a very long time in many, many iterations. In fact, it's a standardized multiple choice computer adaptive test, which means the difficulty level changes based on your performance. It used to be adapted by question. I took it that way. I actually took the first exam that was adaptive, and it was adapted by question. So I got to finish in about 30 minutes, having answered 22 questions. You guys don't get to do that because it's not that adaptive anymore. Now it's going to be a 4-hour endeavor, give or take. It's testing your verbal reasoning skills, your quantitative reasoning skills, your critical thinking skills, and analytical writing. For you guys, since you're pre-vet, almost universally, nobody's going to care about your verbal or your writing skills. I believe we have it in writing that the UC Davis vet school, they only look at your quantitative score. They don't really care what you get on your verbal, although I'm going to put some bottom limits on things because you don't want to have a really super low score, even though you probably won't make that much of a difference. So to register for the GRE, this is one of the first things you want to know and understand when you get there. It's going to cost you money. So the nice thing about the GRE is you can take it pretty much whenever. It's anytime the testing center is open, you can take the test. It's January, February, March, April, May, whatever, all the way through December. Any day you have a open slot, you can take it. Sometimes it's afternoon, sometimes it's the morning. If you require accommodations, these are things like extended time. These are things like test reader, or surprisingly, in some cases, a testing center might say that an accommodation is a left-handed mouse, which is just terrible, but that can sometimes be considered an accommodation. You need to get started applying on that at least 3 months before you intend to sign up for the test. Not before you take the test, but before you sign up for the test, because it can take several months in order to receive accommodations. Just make sure you're getting that taken care of sooner than later. If you have an IEP, an individualized education plan showing accommodations that you had for high school, that's a good thing to have in hand. If you don't, it's very strongly likely that you're going to have to visit with an educational psychologist so they can evaluate you for a learning disability and give you the paperwork that's necessary to get accommodations. The single sheet of paper that UC Davis Office of Disabled Students is willing to give you is not sufficient to get accommodations on the GRE. So it's a bit more involved of a process than that. Retaking the GRE, it's okay to retake the GRE. The GRE is in a lot of ways like the SAT or the ACT. How many people here retook their ACT or SAT like 2, 3, 4 times? Yeah, that's a pretty normal thing to do, and schools are not going to bat an eyelash at that, right? It's going to be the same way with the GRE. You don't really need to take, there's no limitation to what schools are looking at for like, oh, if you took it 2 times, oh, that's terrible. Now you can retake it a couple times and nobody cares. You can only apply to take or register to take it every 1 month, give or take 21 days between attempts, and you can only do it 5 times in a year. If you're taking it that often, you should probably slow down and figure out what you're doing wrong. Don't go into this thinking you're just going to ace this test, because there's some difficulty to it. What is the structure of the test? Well, it looks something like this. You're going to start out with a writing section. Everything you need to know about the writing section is you're going to write 2 essays. They're very simple essays. If you write fancy, that's bad. If you write average, that's good. Because you write these 2 essays, as long as they address the writing prompt and they're in cogent English, then you'll get a reasonable score. You'll get at least 50th percentile, and nobody would ever question it. The only scores here that are going to get questioned are very, very low scores, which are probably due to you writing gibberish or writing in a foreign language. One of those 2, and I don't see people doing that generally speaking. So I would not worry about the analytical writing essays. You will get 2 verbal sections and 2 quant sections. You'll probably get a verbal and a quant before the break, and you'll probably get 1 verbal and 1 quant after the break. However, the order is interchangeable. It might start with quant, it might start with verbal, or vice versa. It might go verbal, quant, quant, verbal, whatever. It doesn't really matter. You'll just get 2 of each. What the tricky part of this is you will see an experimental section and is not identified. It's not scored, but it's not identified. If you're one of those lucky people, you're going to get 3 verbals and 1 quant, or 3 quants and 1 verbal. And I see your question. I'll address that in just a moment. That's actually part of the presentation a little bit later on. Research section, if you get one of those, it is also unscored, and it's always going to be last. That one is identified. So there's really no way to tell in advance, however, whether or not you're going to get an experimental or a research section. So you must always treat all of the sections as if they were the first. Because seeing as how this is an adaptive test, you need to make sure that you're doing really well on the first time you hit that topic, so that the question difficulty ramps up in the second time you hit that section. For example, if you do your first section, all the questions are going to be about medium difficulty. If you do poorly, all of a sudden your second section is going to be pretty easy. They're going to be throwing softball questions, boom, boom, boom. If you feel like your second section is much easier, you probably are not going to score above a 150 on the thing, on that particular section. If you do medium performance on that first section, it's probably going to be medium. You're probably somewhere between 140, 160. That's a pretty okay place, especially for verbal. And then the good performance if you do really well on the first section, you should just be getting hard question after hard question after hard question for the second section, and that's going to give you a score above a 150. And that's really where you want to be with your quant. You want to feel like you're just being punished by that second math section, because that means you've done it correctly, you've done well, and you're trending towards that higher score that you want to have. So the verbal reasoning sections consist of both 50% or about 50% text completion and sentence equivalence, which basically I want to say is just vocabulary questions. So when you're looking at the vocabulary portion of the GRE, I would encourage you guys to purchase one of the decks of GRE flashcards. It doesn't really matter which brand they are. I would veer away from already pre-existing Quizlet or Anki decks or things like that, because you don't know who created them. And when it's a curated list, like what a lot of these companies do, they choose the words carefully to make sure you're getting your biggest bang for your buck, that you're getting a lot of prefixes, a lot of core root words in that set of vocabulary so that you can do the best. So pretty much all your big 3 players in the test prep world, Princeton Review, Kaplan, and Manhattan Prep, those 3 all have reasonable tools or reasonable sets of vocab cards for the GRE. Magoosh is not a big player, and I would actually warn people against using Magoosh as being your end-all be-all of GRE prep. They have a lot of great one-off stuff. It's little like, gee whiz, here's a MCAT question or GRE question of the day. However, they don't have a really strong, difficult set of problems. Most of their problems are going to be on the medium to easy side, and it's not really going to prepare you for the hardest stuff that you're going to see on the GRE. So that might be okay for the verbal side, but it's not going to be okay for the quant side. The quant side is much much more vigorous than I think Magoosh ever makes it look. And then the second part of the verbal reasoning section is going to be reading comprehension. And really here you're getting 1 or 2 or 3 questions about 1 sentence to 3 paragraph passages in which you have to read it and answer some questions that are basically just asking you what happened in the passage. They're very straightforward. However, what they do is they use a lot of recycled language. So if you're not careful, it's easy to fall for bad answer choices. One of the things you want to practice here is making sure you're eliminating answers instead of choosing answers. Because when you're eliminating answers, you're less likely to fall into traps. And that's really the key on this thing, is avoid falling into traps. So you will have about 1.5 minutes per question on this. So most people don't feel rushed on this section. It's just the questions are pretty tricky if you don't have a strong vocabulary. Your vocabulary building is also very important for reading comprehension. All righty, how about the quantitative reasoning section? So you're going to get about 35% of the questions are these things called quantitative comparison questions. They basically give you quantity A and quantity B, and they're going to say which one is bigger, A or B. They're equal to each other, or they are there's no relationship or cannot be determined that relationship. And that's they're tricky. They're not necessarily hard questions, but they're tricky questions. And this is where I think that the Magoosh was tricky, or doesn't get enough of those tricky questions in there. That's one of the places where I think they go astray. That's where I think the 5-pound book of GRE practice problems from Manhattan Prep is a very solid entry into preparing for the quantitative section, because they have a lot of those quant comp questions in there, and they're right at the level of what the GRE actually throws at you. You have to use the computer calculator, you can use a physical one. You have to use the computer calculator, and it is a gutted calculator. It is only plus, minus, times, divide, and the 4 digits. You can't do things like square root or squaring. You can't do things like inverse, memory. None of that stuff's present. It's a very simple calculator. So imagine the basic calculator you have on your cell phone. That's what you would have for the calculator on these questions, which basically means the only thing you should be using that calculator for is just arithmetic. So you're not going to be doing complicated arithmetic. In fact, most questions I would strive to do without the calculator, because you should be able to simplify the questions into that. 10% numeric entry. Those are just ones you have to find the answer and report it. And then 65% are multiple choice, your sort of traditional multiple choice questions. Yep, and you can do that. What Holland is saying, Kaplan website does that. There's a lot of other little websites. I am saying, however, a GRE question every day isn't really the best practice. It's nice to do right now if you're not really in the throes of practicing. So those one-offs are good, but the best practice is going to be taking practice tests. You don't get better at timing until you do full-on practice tests. You don't get better at the leveling, the adaptiveness of the test until you take practice tests. So well, those are excellent things to do, not saying you shouldn't do them, but when it comes really time to focus in on prepping, you want to actually have a nice prep plan, including covering the content and the practice tests. You have a little bit longer on the math questions. You have 1.75 minutes per question because of the fact, well, it's math, and you're going to have to do a little bit more work than you do on verbal. Verbal just reading and plugging in words a lot of times. Oops, went the wrong way. Oh, so that's the structure of the sections. How do you need to score? And so here's the scoring ranges for the different sections. Overall, the 2 scoring ranges for the science, or for the verbal and the quant, is 130 to 170, with the median around 150. Not exactly. This is this past year's data. So the median for verbal was a little bit higher at 151, and for the math was even higher at 153-ish is where your median was. So you've got the median scores there. You want to be above the median on both for sure, even if they're not looking at the verbal. The writing section is scored from 0 to 6 in half-point increments, and the median there is basically somewhere between 3.5 and a 4. So that's where the average folks are generally ending up. This is a scaled test. This is not curved. You are not compared to other individuals when you are actually taking this test. You're compared to a statistical model and that's what determines your score. So don't worry about taking the test in certain times of the year, certain days, certain hours of the day. There's no comparisons there. It's always just versus a grid, a scoring grid. Don't be afraid to guess. You don't lose points for guessing. So if you just have no clue, never leave a blank. Always pick an answer. I usually call it letter of the day. So I always pick the second answer as my letter of the day. So just so I have something to go on. Do know that there's going to be that experimental section. Don't worry, those questions are not scored. In fact, once in a while, you might run into a question which you feel is just totally janky and doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's like, what is this even trying to say? And that very well might be an unanswerable question. Don't worry, it's not getting scored. So if you run into a question that's really freaky, don't let it freak you out. That's just one of the things about the GRE. It's kind of annoying. Scoring targets for most of you. This can vary by veterinary school, but as a general rule, here's what I would suggest most of you shoot for. Just get a four points on analytical writing, just total median score. This is average writing, good grammar, good spelling. Don't get fancy. This is like your classic hamburger essay. Remember that from grade school? You got the top bunch, your intro, the bottom bunch, your conclusion, and you got the three things in the middle, 3 points. That's it. Keep it simple, move on with your life. The verbal reasoning, you want to probably get the 70th percentile, even for the schools that don't care about your verbal. If you're below the 70th percentile, they might start setting off warning flags like this person. They might assume that you don't speak English well, or that you have a hard time doing reasoning, or you have a hard time doing things. So it's not that they'd say you're not out, but they might start asking questions. They might say, hey, you need to retake this GRE because you got to show us that you can read well, or something like that. It's unlikely to happen, but as long as you get in the 155, you're good. And most people can do that with not a lot of effort, just focusing on that vocab, like I had mentioned. The quant is the one you really want to max out. That's the one you really want to do great on. And to feel comfortable with your GRE score, I would say get a 163 or higher on the quant, because that's 80th percentile. Once you're above the 80th percentile, most vet schools are not even looking at the GRE at that point anymore. That's like, okay, they got that hurdle jumped, moving on. What's on the rest of the application? The GRE is not really looked at as a primary part of your application, to be honest. Now, all that's with a little tick mark, a little asterisk, if you were. Always verify any score requirements with the programs to which you're applying. So this is what, like in general, this is what I would shoot for. But if you're applying to certain programs, maybe out-of-state programs, maybe you're applying to Colorado State because they have an excellent oncology program or large animal program, then they might have different expectations. Number one, because it's out of state for you. And number two, because they're kind of a prestigious program. So they might have some higher expectations on the test, or at least different expectations. So as a general rule, always check what it is that you need to be shooting for based on the schools to which you're applying. That's what we really want to go for. Content-wise, the verbal reasoning is, like I said, it's just understanding, like this is what they say in their materials, what it is, what they're testing on the verbal reasoning, understanding how to read and then get information from the text. Most of it's what I would call retrieval. You're going to read a passage and go find something in the passage, and that's the answer to the question. The reading level of these essays is high school level. It is not college level writing. So as long as you've graduated high school, you should have the ability to interpret what they're saying, as long as you know what kind of thing do you have to study to be really solid on the verbal reasoning section. Get those flashcards to learn your what? Vocab. Yes. So the thing that holds people back on even on the reading comprehension is simply vocabulary. If you don't have a strong vocabulary, you will be a little bit stunted on this section. So really, the word of the day, man, start learning the word of the day, like maybe a word of the day toilet paper or something. And so every time you go to the bathroom in the morning, you got another word you're learning or something. I don't know. Does that really exist? Maybe. I was on a Friends episode a really long time ago. Text completion is always vocab. It's vocab, 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 vocab. Nothing more to really say there. You're just plugging in words into blanks. The math is actually interesting because look at the math here. Is this college level math or is this middle school level math? This is like mostly middle school level math. There's a little bit of geometry, which you probably got in middle school, but then they like sneak a little bit of college or a little bit of high school in there. But this is middle school math. And there's some things from like 6th grade you have probably forgotten, such as PEMDAS, because you're so used to calculators doing the work for you, you've forgotten the order of operations, like, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, powers, or parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. You got to do it in that order. It's the little stuff like that that you know how to do, but it's been so long. Exactly. It's been so long that you haven't done them really because you've been doing things like calculus. Oh my gosh. Calculus is so much harder, but it's not as hard as some of these questions when you've forgotten how to do it. This is why you must absolutely review the quant. To get the quant content, I would suggest you get like a Princeton Review or a Kaplan or the ETS or the Manhattan Prep, any of those 4 books, ETS being the company that writes the GRE, any of those 4 cover the content well. It doesn't matter which one you use. Pick one, get one, borrow one from somebody who's already taken the test, go to the library, check one out. Whatever it is, you can probably get a book covering the content on the GRE pretty easily. How do you tackle those verbal questions that talk about a topic you know absolutely nothing about and have to answer questions about? The topic is irrelevant because what I think you're talking about is reading comprehension, because you're supposed to get the information from the passage itself. You don't need to know that topic coming into the test. And so you got to read and understand what the passage is saying about said topic and answer the questions that way. That's what I mean. Vocabulary is key, because if you don't know the vocabulary, then you're going to have a hard time figuring out what the passage is saying about that topic. Some conventions to note about the quantitative section here. One of the things I think is notable is right here in the 3rd bullet. What do you guys see there? It's kind of concerning in the 3rd bullet. Geometric figures such as lines, circles, triangles, and quadrilaterals are not necessarily drawn to scale. So here's the little trap they build into a lot of these questions. Oops. The little trap they build into a lot of these questions here. Here's a triangle. What is this angle? How many degrees do you guys think that angle is in that triangle? Just eyeball it, ballpark it. Looks kind of more than 90, 90-ish. Nope, it's 10 degrees. Wait, what? That's a 10-degree angle? Yes. On a GRE, that could totally be a 10-degree angle, because you've got to pay attention to, well, it's not really a 10-degree angle, Rosalia and Zaira. It's a 10-degree angle because everything else in the question probably said that was a 10-degree angle. So you can't look at it and say that's 90 degrees or close to 90 degrees, because they say right there in the rules, it's not necessarily drawn to scale. So an acute angle can look obtuse. An obtuse angle can look like it's exactly 90. So it's one of the things they do that kind of messes you up on the math. And then, but don't be afraid, it's not always like that. Once you get into coordinate systems, those are drawn to scale. Coordinate systems are drawn to scale, so not everything's freaky. It's just really the geometry questions that get a little bit weird, just a little bit funky. So, what are the things you have to do for the GRE? What are the prerequisites? Nothing. You had to have gone to high school to do well on the GRE, so there's no prerequisites for this test. Woohoo! So you can take it now. Now, here's just some of the materials that you have available to you. Princeton Review, Kaplan, Manhattan Prep, those are your 3 go-tos, as well as the official content, ets.org. I would suggest everybody uses Power Prep, which is the ETS produced. They are the ones who write the GRE. Power Prep is their test engine that they provide to you. You get 2 tests for free. You could pay for 3 additional more. Plus, you can take them more than once, because it's an adaptive test. It'll potentially look a little different for the next time you take it. So you definitely want to get practice tests, and I would suggest you want to get it from ets.org. Outside of that, the 5-pound book, like I said, from Manhattan Prep, 5-pound book is awesome for getting lots of good practice problems for the GRE. So that's my Bible. I have a copy sitting right over here, right next to me. And for content coverage, TPR, Kaplan, Manhattan Prep, or ETS, honestly, whichever one's the overview guide that works best for you, the one you can get cheapest, any of them have all of the exact same information in it. It's not something like you have to get a certain book to do well. If nothing's just said, can you assume the angle measure is equivalent to the length of the side? Okay, ask me that later, Zyra, because that's something that's a little more specific, not necessarily the question for the day. For vocab and the apps you improve of. There's a lot of apps out there for GRE. You could, I think Manhattan Prep does have an app. I think Kaplan has an app. There's not really one that I suggest more than the others. But I would say one of the curated lists is better to go with, not just some random list that you got off the internet. The testing year the testing year for the book doesn't matter because the GRE really hasn't changed since 2015 in any great respects. So the content hasn't changed. You should be sufficient using, say, a 2018 one, a 2018 book. That would be fine. So when you're studying for the GRE, things to remember: do practice tests, do practice problems. You're gonna learn the most from that. Reading books, watching videos does not get you a score on these tests. Doing practice tests and practice problems do. Now, books and videos, they might help you figure out that stupid little thing like finding the least common denominator that you haven't done in forever, or finding the lowest common multiple. You might get some help doing that. But that's just that. That's to cover the content that you've probably forgotten. But get onto the practice problems. You will, trust me, you will never turn back if you start doing practice problems, because you will discover that they are really the best way to go. So, oops, these dates are old. So like just cross those out. I forgot to update those. So let me open up the floor for questions. Actually, just none of this is good. I don't know why I didn't update this. I just stole the presentation. Let me open up the floor for questions. I do advising, so you can feel free to schedule an appointment with me from anywhere Monday through Friday. 9 to 12 actually is accurate. I do drop-ins just specifically for test prep on Mondays from 8 to 10 in the morning. And I also do the HPA drop-ins every day on our afternoon, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday drop-ins. So feel free to pop in there if you just have any general test prep questions. Happy to help you. We do have a GRE program that runs. We actually just started this past week, and we talk a little bit about a certain part of the section, or certain section, and certain type of questions. Then we do some practice problems, and we look at strategies and the content of some of these practice problems. And this teach a lot of techniques, and it's primarily focused on quant. We have those sessions are on Thursdays at 6 p.m. Yes, yeah, Thursdays at 6 p.m. and you can find links to those at hpa.ucdavis.edu/test-prep. And away with questions. Ask me questions. I know I went a little long, but that was also because I was a little late, so I apologize for that. Does your GRE expire after a certain amount of years after you've taken it? The score doesn't expire, but the school you're applying to might not consider it if it's past a certain number of years old. Many schools are 3 years. A lot of schools are 5 years. That's usually, it ranges somewhere between 3 and 5 years before they say that they want you to take it again. So don't take it as a freshman, because you might not apply soon enough to being freshman. So that you want to be careful of that. I think it is valid for 5 years generally. It depends on the school, Zyra. It really depends on the school. I can't say for every school that it's going to be 5 years. Do I get to choose which score I want to submit if I take the test twice? Yes-ish. If you do not, when you register for the test, you can submit it to different schools. When you first register for it, you can have it submit. If you do that, then even if it's a lower score, they're going to get that lower score. But honestly, it doesn't matter. You could hold back and not have it submit when you register for the test, but that means every score report that you are going to do means you're gonna have to pay for every single one of them. At least when you register up front to have it sent to a school, one of the score reports is free. But I mean, if you want to hold back because you're not sure about the score, I don't think that matters. I mean, you'd have to pay that extra. I think it's $27 right now. Should we submit all scores from 2 or more times? We did the GRE, just one the high score. It doesn't, like I was saying, it doesn't make a difference. You can submit all of them. You can submit one of them. The schools don't care. They're just going to look at whatever you've given them and look at the highest score. The GRE is like the SAT that way. It doesn't make a difference. So it's sent to each school, not to Vimcast. Well, you'll submit your score in Vimcast. They'll ask you for your score, but yes, you're submitting it to the schools individually. You have to send it to each individual school that you're applying to, correct? Any other questions? Sorry, my chair's squeaky and I'm bouncy. So the end of the score is Vimcast, and then they send to the other school. No, they don't send it to the other schools. You submit your score reports to the schools. So you're just putting your score in there. That's not a score report. They'll just ask you for your score. Your score report has to come from ETS to the universities you're applying to the programs you're applying to. Are there fee waivers for the GRE? Not as such. No, there's no like fee assistance program for the GRE. There are some programs out there you might look for, which might help you with the fee on that. I can't remember the name of one. It's like kind of this little scholarship thing. If I remember it, I will give it to Annabelle and Morella to send out. I know I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. I'm sorry. But I will give that to them so they can send it out. Years for the vocab cards, really no difference. Again, as long as it's not from like 2007 or something like that, you're okay. As long as it's like within the last decade, you're all good.
Alrighty, if we don't have any more questions, we'd love to give you all a quick little break before we start the vet student panel. And thank you so much, Doug, for helping us out. Oh, it looks like there's a couple more questions.
The book to start with, I would say just your general overview book, like if you look at the TPR, the Kaplan, the Manhattan Prepper, the ETS general book, which covers all the content on the test, that's probably your first starter place, because there's a lot of practice problems in there. Then I would shift to doing just solid practice, like the 5-pound book and practice test, practice test, practice test. So thank you guys for having me. Appreciate it. Sorry about the confusion at first. I was in the wrong place, but we found it, and good thing I emailed these guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, this was great. I learned a lot.